The well-being of people varies greatly across the world. So how can we measure well-being in a way that reflects the quality of people's lives? Does income equate to well-being? Gross domestic income, or GDI, is often used as a measure of well-being. Sweden and the United States have similar GDI per head, and yet the experience of well-being, particularly among the poor in these societies, is very different. Dr. Christel Lund works in a special ward for chronically ill homeless people in Sweden. Our ward was created for those too ill through drug abuse or mental illness to partake in Sweden's generous welfare and healthcare systems.
Because the main part of these homeless people we have in Sweden, they are on drugs and have psychiatric diseases, or one of these or both. And they are really sick.
Dr. Lund works with the most difficult patients imaginable, with psychosis, addiction and chronic illness.
They can come in however they are, because they are very severe sickness. So the alternative is to throw them out in the street again, and that's not very humanistic. So.
In the USA, around 15% live in poverty, and there are estimates that 750,000 are homeless.
Anywhere from 500,000 people every night are without shelter to maybe 2 million people. The estimates are really wide because, again, the data is not that great, but somewhere between 0.5% and 2% probably of the population are either experiencing homelessness or will soon or have in the very recent past.
In the US, the government plays a relatively small role in dealing with homelessness. Funding for the homeless comes largely from charity.
The country has a lot of wealth, relatively speaking, when you think about just square footage of housing per person. The fact that there's so many people who sleep on the streets because they can't find shelter, it just doesn't seem right. So as a responsibility as a community to take care of the people who can't find shelter when there's so much shelter that could be available, I think it's the right thing for a community to do.
This shelter for the homeless receives most of its funding from private donations.
The governments aren't providing for a whole lot of money towards homeless shelters. We're tapping into the community, getting community dollars, individuals giving us checks for $50, $100 a month, and we're utilizing that to provide housing for people who otherwise wouldn't have it.
We rely to me, a disgraceful reliance on the generosity of individuals. In this country, we don't take care of our poor or afford them the opportunities that would help them.
So can we make realistic comparisons between countries using such statistics when there's so much variation of well-being among countries and within countries? GDI is most often used, and many argue that GDI is a good measure in market societies because the prices people pay for goods reflect the values people place on those goods. When we add up all the output of a society and divide it by the number of people, the resulting amount has a good claim to be a useful measure of well-being. Prices reflect the value we place on output. For instance, a Mercedes has a higher price than a Ford because we value the engineering, technology, aesthetics and style of the Mercedes more. Let's look at how building and consuming a car adds to the GDI. This is about £60,000 worth of motor car. Now of that 60,000, about 20,000, say, went on buying inputs from other industries. The steel, the rubber, the leather. So what they did was to add value of £40,000. What did they do with that £40,000? Some of it went on wages, some of it went on interest payments, some of it was profits to the company, which was distributed to the shareholders in the form of dividends and so on. In other words, all of the value added represents somebody's income. The national product is identically equal to the national income. There are many problems with using GDI as a measure of well-being, but some of the main ones are these. First, it often fails to pick up the problems created by pollution and damage to the environment. These costs are not priced into conventional GDI estimates. Second, GDI per head gives us a mean average standard of living. The modal living standard in most countries is way below this, with many living in poverty, whilst others are very comfortably off. The extent of this problem varies considerably between countries, and we'll explore the issue more fully in a later film. A third problem is the existence in some societies of a substantial non-market economy. Subsistence agriculture in many less developed economies means that people live at a higher standard of living than implied by the GDI figures. Such subsistence output doesn't appear in the national accounts. The simple GDI measure doesn't tell you the kind of output that's being produced. Income can be used to build hospitals, schools, universities, parks, which will still further enhance people's lives and well-being. Or it can be used to fight wars, build weapons of mass destruction, and the traffic of people and drugs.
It's a very imperfect measure. I mean, it's been long recognized, but some of the imperfections have become more important over time. We don't measure the time that people spend outside of working for income. And it's always been true that a large part of our time, the majority of our time, is spent not working for income, but is spent at leisure activities, taking care of a family, cleaning a house, conversations even, taking care of children, etc. Another thing we don't measure in national income accounts, people's increased longevity. Of course, we measure the income if they're working longer and they're getting more income. That comes in. But the fact that people put an enormous value on living longer and having higher quality lives, and that this has changed so much in all countries of the world during the last century, and still changing, that we don't measure. These are just a couple of examples of things that we should and could be measuring, but we're not doing as yet.
Largely as a result of these problems with conventional GDI estimates, a relatively new measure, the Human Development Index, or HDI, was launched in 1990. It's commissioned by the United Nations and is launched every year in a Human Development Report that tracks nations developing not only in terms of production and commodities, but in terms of people's lives and development. It has grand claims to putting people back at the centre of the development process rather than the market. Its great claim as an improvement to GDI as a measure of welfare is that it's a composite measure looking at health and education as well as income, so it measures progress by using a concept of development much broader than that allowed by the GDP. In a moment, we'll use our statistical knowledge to see how it's calculated. The nice thing about the Human Development Index is that it's simple to measure and very easy to understand. It takes a value between 0 and 1, where 0 is utter misery and 1 is some kind of utopia. Not only does the index vary between countries, it varies over time. For example, India has been developing rapidly and moving up the rankings. China too has developed fast. It's now a country moving up towards the middle of the HDI rankings. So let's choose China to see how the HDI is arrived at. Before we do so, we have to be clear about what we mean by the geometric mean, which is a particular kind of mean average, which indicates the central tendency or typical value of a set of numbers. It's similar to the arithmetic mean, which is what most people think of with the word average, except that here the numbers are multiplied and then the nth root, where n is the count of numbers in the set, of the resulting product is taken. For instance, the geometric mean of two numbers, say 2 and 8, is just the square root of their product. That is, we multiply 2 times 8 and take the square root to give us 4. As another example, the geometric mean of the 3 numbers 4, 1 and 1 over 32 is the cubed root of their product, which would give us a half. The cubed root of 4 times 1 times 1 over 32 equals a half. Now we can see how the HDI is measured. The first step is to create sub-indices of each of the dimensions. We have to set minimum and maximum values or goalposts in order to transform the indicators into indices between 0 and 1. Once we have the minimum and the maximum values, we can calculate the sub-indexes using the following formula. The dimension index is given as the actual value minus the minimum value over the maximum value minus the minimum value. And then the actual HDI score is a geometric mean of these 3 dimension indices. And the 3 indices are life, education and income, and they are equally weighted, each having a weight of 1/3. The minimum values are set at 20 years for life expectancy, 0 for both education variables, and $163 for per capita GNI. The maximum values are set to the actual observed maximum values of the indicator in whatever country they happen to be. Let's see how that works out for China. The table shows the Chinese indicators. Now the first step is to calculate the life dimension index. And the life expectancy index is 73.5, as you can see in the table for China, minus 20, the minimum value, over 83.2, which is the observed maximum value, which in this case happens to be for Japan, minus 20, our minimum value. And if we work that out, it gives us 0.847 for China. Now step 2 is to calculate the education dimension index. Let's see how we do that. We take first of all the mean years of schooling index, which is 7.5, the Chinese value showed in the table, minus 0, over 13.2, which is the observed maximum value, which in this case happens to be for the USA, minus 0, which gives 0.568. Now we need the expected years of schooling index, which is 11.4 for China, minus 0, over 20.6, the observed maximum, which in this case is Australia, minus 0, which gives us 0.553. Now we work out the education dimension index, which we find by taking 0.568 times 0.553, and now we take the square root of that. So we then take that value minus 0 over 0.951, which is the observed maximum value, which in that case happens to be New Zealand, minus 0, which gives us an education dimension index of 0.589. Now we calculate the income dimension index, and here we use logs of the income data. So the income index gives us the log of 7263, that's from the Chinese data in the table, minus the log of 163, which is the observed minimum value, which happens to be in Zimbabwe, over the log of 108,211, that's the maximum observed value for the United Arab Emirates, minus the log of 163. And that gives us a value of 0.584 for the Chinese income index. So our final step is now to calculate the Human Development Index by combining these three sub-indices. So the HDI is given in the following way. We multiply 0.847 by 0.589 by 0.584 and then take the cubed root of their product, and it gives us 0.663. So this HDI value for China puts it well below the Scandinavian countries in the rankings, but well above many less developed nations.
Even if you think that HDI is an improvement over using national income statistics, there's still a problem. And the problem is that it's still essentially arbitrary. Why are we choosing this particular set of weights rather than another?
There's also the problem that it's still a mean average. Within a society, there can be huge variations in experience of health, education and living standards, in much the same way that mean average wealth data tends to hide a very uneven distribution of wealth.
Do you see the use of the Human Development Index as being a better way than national income accounts of trying to assess the level of income that people have?
Not really. I mean, its heart is in the right place. That is, it's trying to get at things like health and education and income, but it doesn't have a method, or has an arbitrary method of combining them into a single index. It usually weights them equally, the changes equally, and then adds them together. And that doesn't make any economic sense, doesn't make any happiness sense. So you have to think of a way, how can we do that in a way that's grounded in some kind of basic analysis, economic or statistical analysis? And there are ways to do it. What I don't like about the Human Development Indices as they've been developed is that they do it in an arbitrary way. It's not based on anything.
The United Nations recognizes the limitations of HDI and is trying to do something about it. One particular recent change has been with regard to the distribution of income. So they've tended to move HDI down in countries where income disparity is considerable.
It's often the case that as economies grow from low levels, there's a widening income disparity. This happened in Central and Eastern Europe after the collapse of communism there.
Something similar may well now take place in China.
We started by saying that GDI has real problems as an indicator of well-being, but so does HDI. But unless we know what we're measuring, we won't know what significance to attach to any measure of well-being.
But at least if we understand the statistics, we know exactly what those limitations are. You might like now to do your own HDI calculations for your own particular country.